Chapter 11. Homicide. The thought had been lurking in the back of my mind like a tiger at the back of a cage waiting for feeding time, but I hadn't wanted to let it out. No one does. The urge to kill hides deep in the hippocampus, a survival mechanism that will never be rooted out. It sneaks up on all of us from time to time, rarely for some, daily for others. The guy standing there glaring at you when the subway doors open, he won't step aside to let you off. He deserves to die. The bully on the playground who took your Spaldini and ran off to play stoop ball with his friends while you walked slowly home to your mother crying. You told her you lost your new ball down a sewer drain. He deserves to die. Your boyfriend who ignores you when you bitch about your shitty day working at the hair salon. The game is starting, so he grabs a bud, picks up the remote, and pops on the TV. He deserves to die. Maybe because the impulse is so close to the surface, we don't want to acknowledge it. Even Cynthia, who had known Alex and loved him, who insisted that his death could not have been the result of some bizarre sexual practice and who refused to believe he could have killed himself, never took the next step, never gave voice to the only other possible alternative, homicide. Why do you think it was homicide? I asked Keneally. He tossed me another file. What's this? I asked. Something that you never saw, and when you didn't see it, I wasn't there. Inside the folder were a few loose fax pages, crime scene reports filled with dry scientific data describing the interior of Cynthia's apartment. I looked them over. There were vouchers for evidence, which included the piece of fabric from which Alex was hanging, together with a request for fingerprints and the report filed in response to it, stating that there were no prints of value found at the scene. There was also a hand-sketched schematic of Alex's kitchen showing the furniture and fixtures, as well as where his body was found. This last was supplemented by a small stack of photos of the room and his body in situ. I examined the photographs. They were unpleasant. But they didn't tell me anything new. They showed a dead man hanging from a makeshift noose with his legs splayed out in front of him and his butt elevated a fatal few inches off the floor. Again, I was struck by the pathetic quality of the information that is left when it's all over, the dry, analytic approach to the business of death. When I was done, Keneally had his nose back in his file. Okay, Professor, you want to tell me what I think? I asked. Yes, said Keneally, looking up. I agree. It wasn't suicide. Why not? Well, let's forget about what Cynthia says. The physical evidence seems to militate against it. That's not good enough. You can't just say that. You have to think about it like a legal problem and break it down. But it doesn't make sense. The whole thing just doesn't feel right. Right, I know that. And not feeling right is good enough if you're going about your daily affairs, but you're not. You're analyzing a crime scene. And when you're doing that, you've got to break it down into the smallest steps of reasoning. You got to look at everything, even if it seems insignificant. You're trying to figure out what actually happened. There are a lot of pieces of evidence, a lot of facts. You have to look at all of them and then come up with theories, with pictures of the event. Then test each one to see if it explains every piece of evidence you've got. When you find one that does, you might be close to discovering what actually happened. All right already. Testing your theories, even ones you're sure you're going to toss out, you look at the evidence in a different light, and you may come up with some new connections. Okay. So what's the problem with it being a plain old suicide? Well, as I said, the antemortem broken nose doesn't make sense. Also, there's no suicide note, although I'm not exactly sure what that means. What are the percentages with notes and suicides? I don't know the percentages. Some leave a note, most don't, so it's not proof one way or another, but it is a factor. Well, what about the bruising pattern in the abrasions? Yeah, said Keneally. That's what you have to hang your hat on. Poor choice of words. Right. Anyway, see where it says multiple horizontally oriented linear abrasions and fresh contusion within the strap muscles of the anterior neck? There is no way to reconcile the way he was found with the bruise pattern around his neck. The ligature was applied from behind, not above. Also, while suicide hanging victims sometimes have those fractures, they have them less often than homicide strangulation victims. Same is true of the petechial hemorrhages. That's the spotting around the eyes. So he didn't die the way we see him in the pictures. Let's move on to the next thing the cops are talking about: erotic asphyxia, whether auto or otherwise. I say we toss that out because there were no prints of value anywhere near the body, including on the chair. If it was suicide or AEA, you'd at least find his, so the place was wiped down. Yes, we in the business call that suspicious. We wouldn't expect to see that in this situation if the scene had been sanitized by his roommate. Her prints at the scene wouldn't raise any eyebrows, and she'd know it, so why worry about getting rid of them? The fact that someone went to that trouble tells me it's someone who would have difficulty explaining his or her presence at the scene. Also, people who are thinking about prints are more likely to have been in the system at one time or another. Finally, while it doesn't necessarily point towards premeditation, it does indicate a certain level of organization. That points away from a crime of passion. This thing used to strangle him is weird too. How so? I remember it had a beautiful pattern on it, very intricate. It says here it was a large piece of fabric cut up into smaller pieces and tied into a rope, the way you'd cut up a sheet into strips and tie it together to escape out a window. So it sounds like the fabric itself might have been very expensive. Yeah, that might be one reason the cops initially thought about AEA. A beautiful piece of silk like that could have some ritualistic, sensual meaning. But even though the angle of the bruising means that someone else was involved, it still could have been a sex thing. That would have had to have been some really, really rough sex. Yeah. Also, the cuts in the fabric were recent. The cuts weren't hemmed, and there was very little fraying of the cut edges. If this thing was used in any kind of ritual way over and over, you'd expect a lot of fraying. That's right. Keep going. Well, what the hell was it? The report indicates that all of the pieces together formed one piece, 5 feet by 7 feet. That's a big piece of silk. Doesn't sound like something you'd use when you're trying to kill yourself. I mean, why would you spend time cutting up some beautiful piece of silk and tying it into a rope when you could use something else, something just lying around? Maybe you didn't have any rope. So an extension cord, something. But the other weird thing is it doesn't sound like something the killer would have brought along to kill someone. Jesus. What? I just said killer. I can't believe I'm talking like this. Hey, you're just looking at a file and you're seeing a lot of inconsistencies. If he killed himself, I think we'd be seeing a much more coherent picture. Yeah, but who the hell knows? It sounds like this silk's got some kind of meaning to someone. I don't know what it means. It's weird. Yeah, it is weird. I suppose I could ask Cynthia if she's ever seen it in the apartment before. That'd be a start. I looked down at the file in my lap. So we're ruling out suicide or an accidental death during rough sex. Anything else? Come on, Zach. Tell me about the rest of the crime scene. I mean, I know you don't do this anymore, but I was in trial advocacy class with you. I know you can analyze a fact pattern better than this. Walk me through it. Okay. I met Cynthia at the apartment at 7:30 in the evening. Alex was alive, watching TV in the living room. When we got back to the apartment about 2.5 hours later, he was dead. The possibilities are suicide, autoerotic asphyxiation, accidental death during rough sex, or homicide. We're ruling out suicide and autoerotic asphyxiation based on the injuries and the other physical evidence. When the upstairs neighbor found him hanging, he was fully clothed, his pants were zipped. So it could not have been AEA or a sex thing, unless someone else cleaned up the scene, either someone who was there participating or who showed up afterwards. The cops think it was me and Cynthia, but I know they're wrong. Also, if he was that type of guy, into that kind of sex, I think he would have had to have been more discreet. He wouldn't have arranged it right there in the kitchen where Cynthia and I could walk right in any time at the end of our first date. Keneally nodded. Okay, then. That leaves us with homicide. And if it's a homicide, what do we know about it? He knew his attacker. Why do you say that? There were no signs of forced entry. So the killer could have gotten in by subterfuge. Subterfuge? It's a legal term. It means by means of deception. I know what it means. So you think he bullshitted his way in? Or her. Or her, I said. Gas company, phone company, delivery, land shark. Or simply buzzing other apartments until someone let him in. It happens all the time in New York. So does catching the door after someone else opens it and acting like you live there. You mumble thanks, and we're all too polite to say, excuse me, but do you live here? So if it was subterfuge, Alex might not have known the killer. He could have gotten into the building some other way. But then how did he get into the apartment? It still feels like it was someone he knew. Why? Remember, I'm not interested in your feelings. Your feelings are inspired by the facts. Tell me about the facts. There was no robbery, or rather, no obvious robbery. This wasn't a home invasion. Cynthia thought things were messed with, out of place, but the place wasn't trashed. Also, the way the death was manipulated to look like a suicide or whatever, that's a lot of effort to go to if the killer was a stranger. If there's no connection between the killer and victim, why make it look accidental? What else? It must have played out like this. The guy gets in, however. He hits Alex, breaking his nose, stunning him, and subduing him. Then he tapes his wrists and strangles him. When Alex is dead, he removes the tape, cleans him up, and hangs him from the pipe to cover his tracks. Anything else? That's it. That's as much as I see. Good. You done good. There's only one other tiny wrinkle. What's that? See where it talks about the dry parchment-like abrasion and the horizontal abrasions? Yeah? The dry one is from hanging there after he was dead. The other one happened when he was alive. From the way the ME is describing it, it was pretty bad. You could draw the conclusion that the ligature had been reapplied several times, almost as if the guy was trying to torture him, not just kill him. That's also indicated by the taping of the wrists. If he was just going to kill him, he would have just done it. Then there would have most likely be scratches on the victim's neck and some of the vic's own skin under his own nails, all from trying to get the ligature off. There was nothing there. That also supports your hypothesis that the killer surprised him and subdued him quickly. Otherwise, we might find some of the killer's skin under the vic's nails or other signs of a struggle, other defensive wounds. Jesus, doesn't it bother you knowing all this stuff? You get used to it. Anything else you see? I asked. No. So what now? What do you mean? Well, I'm assuming we went through this little exercise for a reason. You're going to call Cleary and Jenkins, right? Let them know what we figured out here? They already know. You spoke to them? No. Then how do you know they know? Hey, Zach, they're homicide cops, remember? They do this for a living. I don't mean to insult you, but if you can figure it out here with a little hand-holding, they're way ahead of you. Then why are they giving me and Cynthia so much shit? I was starting to get angry. Why are they acting like it was an accident? That I don't know, but I'll give them a call. What are their names? He looked at one of the files in front of him. I'll give Jenkins and Cleary a call and see what I can find out. Be careful, I said. Jenkins is an asshole. Really? Anyway, I'll see if I can get anything for you that you can give to your new girlfriend. Help her get some, what do they call it now? Oh yeah, some closure. Now get out of here. I got some of my own cases to work on. Go mop a hallway, fix a leaky faucet or something. Okay, I said, standing to leave. Thanks. I mean it. No sweat. It was good to see you. Go. I left. Outside in Foley Square, the bite in the air was more pronounced, clouds scuttering in from the northwest, promising rain. Lawyers in their suits, fooled into leaving their overcoats home by the earlier warmth, were now turning their suit jacket collars up against the chill, hurrying to get inside before the drops started to fall. Outside the subway, an Ethiopian guy was selling cheap umbrellas that would last through one storm and one storm only. These guys appear whenever rain threatens, hawking their wares at every choke point of the city's foot traffic. Where did they come from at a moment's notice? What did they do with the rest of their time? Theirs was a waiting room I'd never want to see. I resisted the sales pitch and headed underground to take the subway home. And that concludes chapter 11. So, thanks for joining me. If you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and be sure to hit the bell when you do so that you get notifications of upcoming live streams. And head on over to my website, matthewarkin.com, and subscribe there, and you'll get my newsletter, which has articles on writing and on acting.